Welcome back to Between the Edits. My name is Grace, and today I am joined by the amazing Alexandra Wendt. She is an independent author who has an amazing story to tell about her debut novel of Constellations and Clockwork, so we'll be really excited to get into that. She also has a Substack that I personally very much enjoy. It's called Till We Find Joy, coincidentally enough. And so I'll just pass it over to you, Alexandra, to give us a little bit more information about you and your journey here as an author.
I am an independent author. I've been writing way back since I was a teenager. My debut novel just came out last year, and I'm getting prepared to re-release it along with a sequel this next year. I studied art history here in Italy. I got my master's in Italian Renaissance art, met my husband in Florence, and kind of happily ever after then. We just recently bought a country house in the hills in the north here. We have two little boys now. I just write, spend time with my family. Um, it's really nice.
Amazing. And so, living there where you do, that plays a big part in the inspiration for this first debut series now, right? Because you're working on book two, and that'll be coming out soon. So, yeah, give us a little bit about what inspired the novel and how writing it in the unique place that you are kind of took you on the journey for it.
Yeah, so it was definitely inspired by my master's degree studies, not really directly because my master's degree was on like portrayals of mysticism and mystical experiences in medieval sainthood, so very different topic. But I was really fascinated by just learning all the history of the Italian Renaissance and kind of getting more in depth in it in my research. And I don't know, I was just kind of playing around having ideas after I finished my degree because I'd been a fantasy writer long before this. And I thought, well, what if I created a fantasy world that was inspired by the Italian Renaissance? And so I was kind of like playing around with these ideas, and I've always loved steampunk as well. So I was thinking how to fit that in. So then I came up with clock punk, this advanced like clockwork technology in an Italian Renaissance inspired world. And things just kind of started coming together from there, basically.
Amazing. And so there's also, I know, you and I have had some conversations before where you're connected on all the fun places and everything, but there's also a big element to the story about virtues.
Yes. Yeah, that's the other component, actually the other part of the inspiration behind the story was at the time I was also going through this crisis in my Catholic faith. I'd been raised Catholic my whole life, but I don't really want to say I was drifting away from it, but I definitely wasn't like practicing it as deeply as I could have been. And so I went through this kind of spiritual crisis, and I had this realization that the way I was living my life, these beliefs I had, weren't really in line with my faith. And I had to make a choice. I either needed to be kind of all in with my faith, or I needed to leave it completely. And it was a very, very intense thing I went through. And this was something I really wanted to imbue in the story as well. I wanted to talk about characters who also struggle, even though Catholicism, Christianity doesn't exist in their world, they do have this kind of somewhat similar like virtue moral structure in it. And I wanted to write about these characters really grappling with that and grappling with, guilt over things they've done or just struggling with how their worldview could fit into this structure of virtue and ethics, basically.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned right there in the beginning that when you were facing this kind of hard time, this crisis with your own faith, you're talking about how you needed to either go all in or leave it. And I think some people might hear that and be like, well, those are two extreme options. But I think in reality, those are the only two, because when you're talking about belief, it is either all or nothing. You believe in something or you don't, and you kind of almost invite more issues into your life when you have one foot in, one foot out. It can be very confusing. It can cause lots of different issues and things like that. And so the reason why I'm kind of bringing that up is because I think that is kind of an underlying notion to the idea of like values and virtues, and these ideas that like you can't dabble in a value or a virtue. They have to be all in. So does that kind of mindset that you went into the story with kind of come out in the characters and the way that they grappled with the same things that you were sometimes struggling with too?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point actually that yeah, although we don't like to talk about extremes in a lot of cases, but yeah, when it comes to when it comes to having your faith life, I mean, if it really is something that you believe in, if it's something that is important to you, then you should want to be all in. You shouldn't want to try to make concessions here or there, I feel like. And yeah, it's a little bit hard with my book because, as I said, they don't have Christianity in it, so I'm dealing with kind of a very
Mhm.
different structure. And when I initially set out to write it, I didn't even really think of it as a religion. It was more just kind of like, oh, this system essentially that they've all kind of implicitly recognized and followed. So I do show the characters grappling with that and really struggling to try to model these values, these virtues as best as they can, while also knowing that they can't do it perfectly because they still have broken humanity like we do in our world. And so there's always a little bit of that struggle, that fight to do better. But the point is that they continue to fight. They don't just, give up at a certain point, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I'm
Mm.
gonna put a pin in that because you're touching on a question that I had saved for later. So we'll come back to that. But let's, we'll back it up just a little bit. So that's kind of a great segue into, this first novel, some of the themes and the importance behind it. You've had an interesting journey with this novel so far. So you had
Mm.
originally published it with a hybrid publisher, and then now you're having to republish it. Is that correct? Or kind of tell me how that whole process played out for you and what you're doing with the novel going forward.
Yeah, exactly. So it was initially published with a hybrid publisher that was specifically looking for gritty Christian fiction. And so I was like, yes, this is perfect. This is just for my novel. And my experience with them was great. They had, an absolutely fantastic team. I loved working with the editors and everyone on it. But unfortunately, they unexpectedly shut down a couple months ago, right before we were going to launch the Kickstarter for my sequel. So I did have to kind of make an abrupt decision of, okay, do I want to try to continue this Kickstarter and do it all on my own? I decided no, that was too much pressure. I was still working on the second book, which has been a whole other beast in and of itself. It's been surprisingly very difficult to write, actually. And so I was trying to focus on that, and I decided to
Mhm.
pull back, not do the Kickstarter for it. And then, yes, in the meantime, the first book has been taken off of retailers. I'm getting all of the rights back. So, what I'm going to do is re release it next year, probably around the same time the second book will come out, though I'm still trying to figure out the timeline, honestly. I am still working with
Mhm.
most of the team members that were part of the hybrid publisher because they were freelancers in their own right. And they've been really fantastic to talk to throughout this whole transitional process. And they've been very, very supportive and very great. So, yeah, that's a little bit peek into that. There are two other books that I want to write also set in this world. I kind of
Ooh.
think of it as like two duologies that are very, very closely related, essentially a four-book series. But for now, I'm focusing on getting these two books just out into the world, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people will be able to relate to kind of what you were talking about of you were kind of surprised by the situation and having to figure out in a very short time frame how you wanted to handle it. And just the ability to kind of take a step back and understand what is going to be best for you as far as like your limitations go in the short term and what you really want to get out of the novel and how that kind of influenced your decisions on how to handle that situation. I think that's something that is my hat's off to you. We had connected before this had happened, and so I kind of, we were talking as this was happening, and you handled it so well. So I just also wanted to acknowledge that. I think
Oh.
you were thrown a curveball, and I think you handled it really well. And I'm excited to see the direction that you're now taking it. So, as far as you are doing a serialization of part of the first novel on your Substack.
Yes, that is right. So actually, today, or rather the day that we're filming this, I just released
Mhm.
the prologue to it. And I think I'm not going to serialize all of it because, of course, I want
Mhm.
to incentivize people to buy the book when it comes back out. But I
Yes.
think about half of it, roughly, I don't know for sure, But yeah, I will be serializing a large portion of it on my Substack over the coming year. That will also buy me more time to finish the second book. And I wanted to keep up kind of a readership for it, keep building up hype for it, because right before this happened with my publisher, I felt like I'd started to gain some traction on social media and, finding
Right.
more readers and more people who were interested in it. So I kind of wanted to keep up that momentum somehow. And I really like Substack. I really enjoyed my experience on it so far. I've seen some other writers, serialize stuff. So I thought it might be fun to play around with.
Yeah. And if correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe part of your rationale for wanting to do that is almost creating kind of like a book club feel around it, where you're doing a really fun like how you're presenting it. Because I'm following it, so I've read the first couple posts you've made, and so it's really fun. You're taking a very creative approach to it, but you're looking for like really deep engagement with your story.
Yes, exactly. I will admit it's a little bit of a pushback of the whole kind of rapid publishing, the quick release culture that I'm seeing right now. No
Hmm.
shame to any authors who are doing that. I think that people who can write fast and publish quickly are awesome. I am not one of them. And with this book, the way I wrote it, kind of my mindset around it, I really wanted people to engage with it deeper. It does have a bit more of like an academic tone to it, a little bit like Babel. Um, so yeah, so I would, I was set about this thinking that I would like some engagement with the chapters and people to kind of be forced to read it slowly and not try to read it very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, I can appreciate that. Especially with some of the themes that are in the book, there can be a lot to kind of digest, right? And I think the story is engaging in a way that you feel like you're learning and you're like wrestling with these things alongside the characters without feeling like it's not like a podcast like this. Like it's like you're with it in the characters. And I can completely see where you're coming from with self-publishing is amazing. Um, However, it does come with, obviously, like there's pros and cons to everything. One of the cons is that you can publish something very, very quickly, and you can race through all the steps, right? And so
Yeah.
sometimes there's a lot of books out there that are self-published and they're great, but they don't have some of those more refined qualities that you get out of like really taking your time with the book, engaging other people in the process, and finding those things out about kind of how to further shape your book before just sending it straight to publication. So I have noticed that that's definitely like there is part of the self-publishing machine out there that just churns out those books and people enjoy them and they're great, but you do miss out on some of this process of like slowing things down and really like engaging with the story and bringing other people into that process.
Yes, absolutely. And personally, even remembering being a teenager and just being an avid reader, there was this excitement and anticipation of getting to wait a whole year or
Mhm.
even more than a year sometimes for the next in a series to come out. And remember, I think Tuesdays were, I don't know if they still are in trad publishing, but Tuesdays used to be like the big release day for books, at least if I'm remembering correctly. And so I'd always be so excited for, this Tuesday to come around and the next book in a series would be out. And I'd go to Barnes and Noble or Borders when it still existed, or
Right.
this great independent bookshop in my hometown and get it. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah,
miss that a little
absolutely.
bit too.
Yeah. And I do think, I could be wrong, but I do think that Tuesdays, Wednesdays is still kind of like big publication days, even like because I mean, it makes sense. Like the traditional publishers kind of set the tone probably for some of these things. I don't know that independent publishing has upturned that apple cart yet. So I think a lot of it still does follow those similar trends. But it's even the same with podcasts. When I was researching what are the best times to release
Mm,
podcasts, most people listen to podcasts on their daily commutes or their normal, workout routines or whatever times people find. But it's usually during the day, during the week, right? So podcasts
yeah.
don't typically, or at least not many of them, release on the weekend. They're usually a weekday type thing, kind of like books. So um, there is something to that. Figuring out the time and everything, and then you're right, yeah, it builds the anticipation for it, and you get to look forward to it a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say if you were to tease the listeners a little bit about what they could expect coming out of your Substack serialization, right? Kind of what you're hoping to bring to the table. What would be your little elevator pitch for that?
Yes. So, well, the book itself, as I said, is Italian Renaissance inspired, set in a different world technically. And it follows this dispossessed noblewoman turned into a clockmaker as she is forced on a heist to steal illicit experiments on ether for the man who actually ruined her family and created this whole who toppled the noble structure in their world. Um, so by serializing it on Substack, I have been annotating the book actually. It's taken me a surprisingly long time. And what I was going to do is I was going to turn these annotations into a PDF guide that was going to be available through the Kickstarter. I might still offer this guide at some point in the future. I don't know yet. But for now, I'm going to put these annotations in the Substack itself. And so by reading these chapters on there, you'll get to see a little bit of insight into my process, some fun facts about it. I like to include also some links to research that I did during it. And the prologue doesn't have this, but most chapters, I'd also like to add some questions for engagement for the readers as well. Just some like fun extra things to bring you into the world a bit more and also my
Mhm.
process while writing it.
Amazing. So you said it was a
Yeah.
little, you said it's been surprisingly difficult to do this annotation. Um, I can imagine it would be. What's been the biggest hurdle? Like, what surprised you about how difficult it's been? I think it would be easy to assume that it's just like this is something you've worked so closely on, and then going back through and annotating it, would be difficult. But in your own words, I guess, why do you think that's been so difficult a process?
It's been very difficult reading the book after it's been published. I think that's
Well,
it. It's just it's a little bit weird to me. I've been on a couple other podcasts and I will not listen to the episodes actually once they're out, mainly because I don't like, listening to the sound of my voice and I'll just like kind of find little things to critique. It's kind of the same thing with the book. I mean, that being said, I have enjoyed rereading it and I've enjoyed it more than I thought I would actually. But at the same time, it is a little bit weird to read something that I know that a lot of other people have read and have formed their own opinions on. And I think that's also why actually writing the second book has been a little bit difficult too. There's kind of the self-conscious, oh, even if the receptivity is good, I don't know, it's a strange feeling to have your work out in the world. And I think as a new author, that's a feeling I'm still getting used to. It is exciting though, because this is something I've wanted for a long time and have worked really hard for. And I love, talking to readers. I do love sharing my work. But yeah, I think that's why the annotations have been a little bit difficult. And then plus there's been life stuff too going on, of course. I've been very busy with small children and other things.
of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can absolutely relate. Since starting the podcast, and I do have someone who edits the podcast videos, but I do a lot of the clips. I do a lot of the other things that go along with the podcast. Having to listen back to my own conversation with somebody over and over and over again, I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, I'm a terrible speaker. Like, I keep saying I keep saying I look off to the right hand side every single time I'm forming my thoughts. Like, all these different things that you nitpick about yourself and you have to listen to it over and over and over again. And I think it's funny because
Right.
it's the same thing with creating a novel because write out your first draft. And that in and of itself, depending on what everyone's individual writing process can look like, but there can be lots of editing and revising happening concurrently with that. So you're going over it over and over and over again. And then you go through rounds of beta reading, right? Or you go give it to an
Yeah.
editor. And then, so like you get people's feedback along the way and it's great. And it helps, me realize your story. Um, but you've already gone through it so many times by that point. And then you publish it and you're like, I'm done. And then now you're going back through and rereading it. And I can see how that would, bring about that same kind of feeling I get when I have to watch a podcast back 20 times in order to edit it. And and I'm like, I said that. I said that, didn't I?
Yes. Yes. I know I've had some people ask me, "Oh, are you gonna make any changes with it now before you re-release it?" I'm like, "Nope, I am." It's although it can be a little bit tempting to do so, but no, I have gone through this book so many times. I spent, I think, 3 years on it, so many revisions. Absolutely
Right.
not. I did find I think I found one typo in it while I was reading for the annotations though, so I might fix that, but
Right.
otherwise,
Well, and
no.
that's just a typo, right? Like it's not like it's anything
Yeah.
significant to the story. But yeah. Um it's definitely one of those things that just like gets you a little bit when you're like
Yeah.
going through it. But I think it's really great to do too as well. And like acknowledging that like there's so many people who have already had like their experiences with this story. They have read the book and it's resonated with them one way or the other, right? And then I know that like books will do like after a certain number of years, they'll do like special editions, right? And they'll add different cover
Mm,
art or they'll do like different, excerpts, fun stuff to put in there. They might update portions of the book, but it becomes a very personal thing where you are, creating a fan base who loves this story and then to change it slightly here or there, you know,
yeah.
you run the risk of upsetting readers too by doing that as well. So, um, you're like, that ship has sailed.
Yes. Exactly. That is an important point too, is you're not going to please every reader. Absolutely
Mhm.
not. And that is okay. So, you write for the people who love your book, you just focus on them and that's it.
Absolutely. Well, and also like you were saying with your characters, one of the big things is, understanding that you can never achieve perfection, and everything like that. And so it's the same grace that we have to give to ourselves and the things that we're trying to accomplish in our pursuits. There's never going to be such thing as perfection, and we ourselves are going to be the worst judges of some of those things, and unreliably so.
Yes, absolutely.
We talked a lot about your debut novel, kind of your journey with it so far, where it's taken you, some lessons learned through that process. But how did you get into writing in the first place? You mentioned previously that you have written other fantasy novels. And so this was the first to publish for a number of reasons. But take me through your journey of what it was like to be interested in reading, be interested in writing, and decide that you wanted to be a published author.
Yes. So I've been reading and writing basically ever since I could remember. I know when I was a little toddler, most toddlers will kind of carry around a stuffed animal or something. I carried around a little Mother Goose book that I had. So I've always loved books and had a fascination for them. I remember receiving a journal on my fifth or sixth birthday, I think. So like I couldn't really write, but I did like try to write in it. And as years went by, I ended up writing in it. Um, Wrote some Star Wars fan fiction when I got really into that when I was 10 with my brother. So that was super fun. The first like proper novel I wrote though, I think I was 13 or 14. And I initially wrote it as kind of an escape. I didn't really have many friends growing up, and reading and writing to me was a way to, yeah, just escape. So I loved creating
Mhm.
my own fantasy world. I worked on that novel for years, all through high school, even a little bit into college. Queried some agents unsuccessfully, and eventually I was like, okay, I need to finally just write something else and put this aside. So I wrote another novel in college that dealt with time travel in Scotland, even though I hadn't read Outlander when I started writing it, but then the Outlander craze was kind of happening around that time too, which was kind of funny.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Had a lot of fun with that, but also wasn't successful in getting an agent for it, so set that aside. And then between college and then I did a gap year and came to Italy in that time, and then grad school, I kind of became too busy to write or to really write seriously. But I did try to write some other novels, and I didn't query anything else though, I don't think. And eventually, during grad school itself, I just did not have any time to write, so I kind of took a break from it. And then afterwards was when I had my spiritual crisis. I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, whether to stay in Italy, whether to go back to the US. And I had the idea for what became of Constellations and Clockwork, and ended up writing that in a way to process what I was going through. Um,
Mhm.
but then, of course, I tried to step back from my own personal experiences as well and revised it a ton and made it into what it is now.
What do you
So.
think was different about this time with this book, right? So you mentioned that you had tried querying two previous novels. Um, First of all, I'm curious if you ever have any intentions of returning to those and maybe, down the road or something like that. But that's maybe a question for another time. But what do you think was special about this time around?
I love that you asked that because yeah, I love it explaining this to people. The other novels, okay, so this also fits into my like spiritual crisis. Writing had always been something that I just kept to myself. You know, I always kind of prayed to God for other things, but writing was never something I really let him into. And I don't really know why. I think it was something I just always kept very personal. You know, I never even talked to my family about what I was writing. I never let my parents or my brother read anything. Um, and so I never really talked to God about it either. The difference was when I started of Constellations and Clockwork, that was I was kind of coming out of the other side with my spiritual crisis, more firm in my Catholic faith. And that's when I told God, like, okay, I'm going to try writing something for you, or, you know, really with you in mind. Try to write something that actually glorifies you. Like, this is not mine. This is going to be yours. And I don't it's something did feel very different about that process. I would open each writing session in prayer. I tried to be, you know, very intentional about everything I wrote. Now, I did struggle with scrupulosity at the time too, this kind of, you know, obsession with spiritual guilt. So
Hmm.
that also played a bit of a negative effect into it as well. And I tried to step back from that during revisions and not be so like concerned about, you know, everything I was writing. But I do think that process of praying and really saying, I'm trying to glorify you with this work, Lord. I do think that helped. And I really did kind of feel, you know, him enter into the story and help me with it. It was just a really interesting and unique experience, I think.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and well, I think for some authors, right, and everyone's different, but you oftentimes hear some authors saying that, like, like, I really wanted to write the story. I really needed to write the story. I wrote the story for myself because I was somebody who needed it at that time. And I think that that can be a very powerful story. But I think in other cases, for that person at that time or in different times or different people, writing is very, very personal. And depending on what you're writing and how you're writing it and the pieces of yourself that you're leaving in that story, fear can get in the way when it comes time to finish it, right? Like, how many times does,
Yeah.
fear or something like that prevent us from doing something that would have had like a big impact on our lives? And so I think that can be a big factor sometimes. At least I feel that for myself. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of what I was thinking about as you were talking about this very personal experience of writing. And what was different this time is you weren't just writing for yourself or for X or Y or Z reasons. You were trying to specifically glorify God. There was a something bigger at stake there than just letting yourself down. Is that a fair characterization? Maybe.
Yeah, I think definitely. There was obviously, as I've said, a very strong personal aspect to it, but
Hmm.
there was this great surrender I tried to do at the same time and saying, "Okay, this is for you, God. You know, just do whatever you want with this." I'm still figuring out what he's trying to do with it, but yeah, that's definitely where I was coming from.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I love that.
We're going to take a quick break from the conversation so I can tell you a little bit about a great product. You may have already heard me discuss this on the podcast, but I have what I call my legacy bookshelf. This is a special bookshelf reserved only for those books which I cherish enough to want to pass on to my children. Knowing this, a close friend of mine gifted me this custom book embosser. And here's how easy it is to use. So you can just squeeze this, and this comes right out. And then to put it back in, just clicks right back into place. And then this is a book. This is one of my favorite books. This book has an inscription to me from my grandma who gifted it to me at Christmas. And right below that is my custom seal. Now I can have a true collection of legacy books that I'll pass down to my kids, all marked with a custom seal. This is a great gift for book lovers. Use the affiliate link in the description or code BETWEEN at checkout. That's spelled BETWEEN. Using this link or that code helps support the podcast and is truly appreciated. Now back to the podcast.
So that kind of gets into some of the other questions that I have for you here. One of which is your faith obviously plays a big role in it. We've seen how that was kind of like one of the main drivers for why this novel became your first debut published novel, which is amazing. You prayed before writing and everything like that. Walk me through a little bit about how your faith ended up influencing either the writing process, the story itself. What might people be able to kind of glean from the story if they were to read it, that had your faith kind of stamping on it?
Yeah, so I think the big thing that I was going through while writing was trying to figure out on a more like philosophical level, even though I've never studied philosophy, what is objective truth? How can we come to know objective truth? And that's basically the big question that the characters are asking themselves too throughout the novel. So you definitely see that present in there. Um, Dante was also on my mind a lot, even though we don't take Dante as kind of official church teaching really. But his Divine Comedy, in a way, it's fairly similar. Dante becomes lost in the dark wood. The main city in it is called Selva Scura, and Selva Oscura in Italian is dark wood. And so I named a lot of things in the book after Dante and after things in the Divine Comedy. So people who are very familiar with that will probably pick up on that and either find it enjoyable or annoying. I don't know. And the characters themselves, go on this they go on a physical journey, of course, but they also go on a spiritual journey. They all actually, when I was designing the characters, I assigned each of them a vice and then a corresponding virtue that I wanted them to work toward. And so I have them working toward that on the journey in the book. Now they don't, not all of them perfectly achieves that at the very end, but they at least are kind of on the right path toward the end of it. And so, I wanted to both incorporate, of course, my own like grappling with these issues, but also fit it into a bit of this larger literary tradition I think we can find not only with Dante, but other authors I think throughout the centuries have dealt with very similar topics.
One of the things you mentioned is each character had an assigned vice and then a corresponding virtue that they worked towards. One of the things from I believe it was your acknowledgments, but I might be misquoting that, but you specifically talk about how when one retains only certain values and rejects the rest, those chosen values become distorted. So, and I love that because you show how in your cast of characters, right, there's a group, kind of a found family type vibe. There's a group of characters who, like you said, all have these different vices, and they go through this journey together and in that process come out on the other side closer to certain virtues. So you have like a concert of values that are needed in order to retain virtue, where they have to be kind of foiled against each other in order to see the things that they're missing, and things like that. So I'm just curious on when you were writing that and you were seeing all this come together, like how did that concert play out for you as you were looking at your cast of characters and all of these virtues and vices kind of almost in concert with one another?
Yeah, so part of that was inspired by this G.K. Chesterton quote from Orthodoxy. I can't pronounce anything, which I'm going to misquote it, so I'll just kind of paraphrase. But he kind of said something along the same lines that we need the virtues together. Others, if they're like wandering alone, they become lost. They become, yeah, as I said,
Hmm.
like distorted, engorged, and I think that goes into this community aspect I was thinking of with the whole idea of found family in the book too. How the characters, it's not enough that, oh, you just work toward virtue and like self-improvement, because I mean we see that a lot today with people who talk about self-care, becoming the best versions of themselves. That's all well and good, but what does it really matter then if you're not trying to help each other out, if you're not in community with other people? And I think
Hmm.
that's what I was thinking of while writing. Like, okay, we have these characters, they're trying to do better, they're trying to understand the world. Um, Actually, I'm thinking of like one character in particular who has one of the main viewpoints in it. It's also the romantic lead, Gianpaolo. I think we see that exemplified very well in his character. I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but he, at the very beginning of the book, it's pretty obvious that he, unlike the others, from the outset, he's trying to do better. He's trying to be better, but he needs to learn throughout the book that it's not just about him. He needs to learn to work with the others to, yeah, kind of help bring them all together in a way.
Yeah. And I think you kind of touched on nowadays, especially in Western world civilization, we have a highly individualized society. Um, and what's interesting is we see now out of that, we have a very individualistic society. But when it comes time to addressing things of a community sort, it's almost like we see people trying to take the same um, mentality for that very individualistic view of things and applying that to the community as if what community means is supporting everyone on an individual basis. But then, as you're talking about before, that
Yeah.
becomes very subjective. And so you have to have whatever you're supporting on how you extend that to the community. It has to be rooted in something objective. And so the truth matters a lot. Then, what does it truly mean to be there for your neighbor? What does it truly mean to exemplify these things? What does it truly mean to work together for a common good? What is the common good? How do you define that? Uh,
Yes.
so it kind of all ties back into what you were talking about. One of the main things that you were kind of working through was subjectivity versus objectivity when it comes to these very important things. If your whole standard metric is what's best for me, how do I feel? Then you're not going to get very far once it comes time to living in the world with other people.
Yes, exactly. And I should note along the same vein, another something else I was reading while I was writing this book that was highly influential to me was The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. And he
Mm.
really gets into this. It's kind of the whole point of the book, actually, is like what are we doing as a human species if we can't recognize objective goods anymore, basically.
Right. And so I actually
Yeah.
I love how you mentioned like going through the process of annotating the book and kind of giving some behind the scene peeks at how you wrote it, the research that you did. I think a big thing that makes a difference when you're trying to figure out what those objective truths are, and how it's best to employ them in actual practice in real life, is tradition and history. And that's also something you see a lot in your novel of the characters grappling with the tradition and history that once guided society and then was taken away.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's a subject that really interests me too because you can really play around with that, and I think there are some gray areas too. Obviously, not everything that I mean, is tradition or that could be said to be tradition is
Mhm.
good. Obviously, we do need to modernize some in some areas. So so yes, we can talk about objective values from that sort of standpoint. But something else I wanted to bring in the novel that's it's not touched on a lot, but just a little bit is even the thought of like architecture. Of course, since I studied art
Right.
history, I think about like art history and even architectural history. And okay, what can we learn from our past with these sorts of things? We can see like these beautiful old ruins, beautiful old churches, and do we just let them decay and crumble and build new things in their place? Do we conserve them, restore them? Do we use them for their same purpose or a different purpose? These are obviously things I've thought about a lot in my research, but even in the novel itself, as this society progresses in the novel, as they kind of try to reshape themselves and move forward after most of their noble structure was demolished 20 years previously, how does like the very structure, the infrastructure of their city change or not change? I'm not saying I don't really address this in the book because, as I said, the characters are going on a journey throughout it. They're constantly passing through new places, but it was something that's on my mind while I was writing it, and it's something I do want to explore a little bit if I have the space to in the second book.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
actually reminded me of a conversation I had a little while back. My boyfriend and I went out to dinner with some of his coworkers, and the topic came up of architecture. This was a person who had spent a lot of time living in Europe, and then coming here, he was like, "Where are the beautiful buildings? Where are the places where I can just sit
Yes.
and think and feel inspired, and see beauty and everything like that?" And so, again, like I am kind of like you were talking about earlier, how not to throw modernization out the window, right? There's a lot of utilitarian benefit to a lot of the reasons why we have done the things that we have with American architecture and things like that. And that's not to say you can't find beautiful buildings and all that kind of stuff here, but there is a bit of a difference when you're looking around at the way that the cities are formed, and how that makes you feel and reflect on your life. And like, am I rushing through things or am I taking time to slow down and like think about things? And so the setting of a story, all this, bringing it back around, the setting of a story, right, and the world that you're immersed in is huge, not only for your characters, but for your readers as you're going through it with them.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I have had many readers really love the settings and the descriptions in the novel. That's been something people have remarked remarked to me a lot about, which is kind of funny because I did, of course, try to do extensive world building before, but I felt like I wasn't thinking about it that much while I was writing. I don't know. I'm a very character driven person, so I'm kind of obsessed
Mhm.
with my characters and their journeys, and the setting is almost secondary to me. But I did have a lot of fun with exploring different settings in the book, from urban to
Sure.
kind of more natural settings. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun for me, I think.
Right, and I'm sure you
Yeah.
had with your background from your master's, um, some inspiration to draw off there, kind of a foundation to work from. I'm sure you still had to do quite a bit more research to really flesh it out to the degree that you did, which I would agree with the readers. Look, it was amazing. It was very immersive. But yeah, I can I can imagine that took a little bit more research, even though you had like this. I think maybe it comes from the fact that you had a natural interest in those things, and so it just naturally came out of that.
Yeah, I think so. I was
Mhm.
trying to think of like specific inspirations. Obviously, Florence very much inspired Silvascura, the main kind of city the characters were in. Um, Siena kind of very lightly inspired one of the smaller towns they pass through. And then a lot of like they go on a journey like through mountains and stuff. And I was actually thinking not of Italy, but summers I spent in New Mexico as a kid, where my mom's
Mm,
from. I spent every summer there hiking around the mountains with my brother and cousins. And so I was thinking about that a lot too while they were on their journey. And okay, what would this be like? There's this kind of really intense scene. Oh, maybe it's a little bit spoilery, so I won't really go into detail, but something happens to Clemenza in the mountains, the main character. And it didn't happen to me personally, but my own experience hiking, I could very much picture it, and I could see how this would play out, what would happen, what it would look like, what it would feel like. Um, so yeah, it was really interesting that these kinds of random parts of your life, I think, as a writer can come to inspire settings, whether you're consciously or subconsciously thinking
right.
about it.
Yeah, I was about to just say, like,
Yeah.
whether intentionally or unintentionally, right? Like, if it just ends up coming out in the story, because it's easier to write about things that you have intimate experience with. Like, if you know how it felt to be hiking in New Mexico, and kind of the climate and the different fears, concerns, the physical toll, the exhaustion, the sights, the breathtakingness of it all. Um, it's easier to write that realistically because you experienced it. So
Yes.
yeah, you can have the intention to write something, and then all of a sudden it's just, wait, I know that.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned earlier, kind of a little nugget there, that you are more character driven, at least when you're writing. Is that the same for the stories you like to read, or is that kind of just something that you've learned about yourself as a writer?
Yeah, it definitely applies to the stories I like to read too, actually. I've talked about this with my husband a lot. He also likes to read. And because I've been frustrated by books that I otherwise enjoyed or like thought I would enjoy, but if I just can't quite connect to the characters, and I don't even necessarily mean like them, I don't need to, feel like I need to be friends with them or something, but if I can't like sympathize with them or find something just deeply interesting about their past or what they're going through, then even
Uh-huh.
if the book is written beautifully, even if it has, great world building or whatnot, I'm just not going to be quite as into it, I think. And I know for fantasy that it might be a little bit odd because, fantasy is something that requires a lot of world building. And a lot of people who
Yeah.
read fantasy read it for that experience of a whole new world and magic systems. And I do love all of that too, but I need the characters, honestly.
Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying for sure. I don't think I've ever thought about it before of if I had to like put one in a primary versus a secondary position. Thinking about the kind of books I like, even and fantasy is a genre that I love. Even in the fantasy genre, I think I'd have to agree with you that if there's not something gripping about the character, the world can be interesting, but why do I care so much about the world if I can't connect somehow to the person who's going through it? But I think I would have to agree with you, and I'm welcome for people out there to disagree, because that's not to say the setting is unimportant. But if I had to choose one, I think I would want to make sure that the character is something that is written in a way that, even if, like you said, even if you don't like the character, or you can understand their motivations, and there's something interesting about following them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So kind of. tying into the next question, that's one of the important themes in your book. Obviously, it's like very character driven, but your characters, or at least kind of like the main ones that this first book tends to really focus on the development of, learn that they need to accept their imperfections, but realize that they cannot remain as they are. So I think again, for the characters that this book kind of mainly focuses on and their development, what was the process of writing that like, of figuring out what direction they were going to go to, how much they would develop versus not develop, what really benefited the story and kind of made that cohesive theme? How did that process, was that something that you intentionally sat down and outlined, or were you just like the story wrote itself kind of thing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It was pretty difficult. I did know that I didn't want their development to be complete by the end. I wasn't sure when I first started writing it if there was going to be a sequel or not, but I did know that regardless, I didn't want it to be complete because it just felt the most natural to me. Um, I'm trying to think in terms of actually outlining their development, though. I don't think I got into very specific detail. I think I just kind of let it play out draft by draft and go with what felt most natural to me. I'm trying to think if there's something more specific. I did struggle. I think I struggled the most with Clemenza, the main character, because she she has such like fiery, passionate emotions. She's a difficult character to like. I mean, I love her. I also kind of hate her. I think because she has like such intense emotions, it was really, really hard for me to get in her headspace as such an angry and bitter person at the beginning and try to bring her to a softer spot by the end. That was definitely very hard to do. And it's been hard in the second book as well, actually, to try to show this balance of, okay, she has changed. She is a lot softer now. She's a little bit gentler, but she still has kind of that fire and that stubbornness in her that was present in the first book.
Do you maybe can think of maybe a reason or something why she was the main character then?
Oh, I think she was because I hate saying this because I don't want people to get a negative impression of me, but I think her mindset at the beginning, she was very similar to how I was feeling personally around the time that I was writing the book. Now, I don't have the kind of like explosive anger that she can have,
Good.
and I like to think that I'm not as cruel as she can be with her words sometimes. But definitely, she's very, very bitter about the world, and I think that was a space that I was in around the time that I was writing the book, and so I needed to have a character who felt the same way as me, and to kind of take her by the hand and say, "Okay, let's get out of this negative space
Mm.
now. Let's try to move on from here."
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and
Yeah.
then that would make sense why maybe she's um one of the more difficult characters for you to write, because I think that's indicative of the fact that that's really not like you know, like you struggle with how to portray her because it's not something that feeling, you know, that she's struggling with, that you struggled with, was something that didn't feel maybe as natural to you, like kind of an understanding of why do I feel this way? Is that maybe
Yeah.
I'm reading into it too much?
No, no, I think that's a fair point. And also, even though I can go on about how, oh, her and also John Paulo, they very much, a lot of how they feel and kind of how they process things and what they go through emotionally is very similar to what I was going through. But I also
Mhm.
make a point to say the actual concrete experiences that they're dealing with are not the same. And so it was very interesting to, on the one hand, yeah, take them through a little bit of a personal journey with me, but also in a completely different way with very different problems and different struggles that they're facing.
Right. I think is also a
Mm.
testament to like how powerful stories can be, because people be coming from all different types of contexts and still find a way to relate to a character in a particular way. Um, and also that's to say that when you're writing a story, there's an art to having certain subtleties, but that's also the time where you can play with extremes, right? So you can take a character
Yeah.
who has an extreme, right? That and then like you said, like kind of bring them back towards like a nice little middle place or whatever. So that's one of the fun things about being an author, is you can play with some of those dynamics a lot.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, well, I'll wrap up with two questions for you. Um, The first is going to be related to your Substack, Till We Find Joy. I think it's really, really beautiful. I've enjoyed reading what you've had posted on there so far. Lots of really fun, interesting content. And so, in what you have written for that so far, if you were to give somebody a piece of advice on a lesson you learned for choosing joy until you find it in and of itself, what would that piece of advice be?
Yes, I would say that you can find joy even when it seems like there's nothing beautiful around you. I say this again as the recovering art historian, someone who's very interested in aesthetics and like kind of physical beauty in her surroundings. I wrote an essay on there. Of course, I don't remember the title of it, but I published it about a month or so ago, I think, or maybe just a month ago, and or maybe it was earlier this year. Sorry, I don't remember. But anyway, the whole point of it was about when we were living in our former city before we moved out here in the country, and just how ugly I felt everything was around me. Our apartment was terrible. Just the urban setting we were in, the particular part of our city was just, it was not a pretty place. I was pregnant at the time, and that always kind of puts me in a dark mood for some reason. Pregnancy just does bad things to my brain. And
Yeah.
we were just stressed with everything. And yet I was watching my 1.5, I guess almost 2-year-old at the time. I was watching him just be delighted by everything. Like, I think I
Mm.
described in this piece about how, I was sitting on the floor, there were rags or like towels shoved up against the windows because they would always leak when it rained. And how my little 2-year-old, he would just find joy in like rolling his cars around our collection of succulents, or how he just loved like holding a cup under the faucet and was just fascinated by the water going into it. And I think that's something that I would like to. It was a lesson that I learned, and that I think other people can learn too. Was even if things seem really ugly and bleak and, I don't know, stressful or awful, you can still find something to be delighted by. Just you have to kind of look at it through the eyes of a child, I think. Sounds a little bit cliche, I
Oh,
know. But it really hit home for me this past year, that lesson, I think.
yeah. There's some of those things that I think that are just like so true and that they're said so many times that like it becomes, something kind of like that. But I don't think that that diminishes necessarily the value of what it is, where like we've been in this world for a while now, and you get to the point where you feel like there's nothing new, everything is, that kind of stuff. And that's why it's one of those things that I think is an underrated, I don't want to say tip or hack or whatever, but just like continuing to challenge yourself to learn something new all the time, is because we get, I think, so used to thinking like we've done it all, we've seen it all. There's, like we're all just cynical about the world, in some ways. Like,
Yes.
and so challenging yourself to like learn something new, or like you said, like challenging yourself to see something through the eyes of a child for the first time, right? Where like everything is a new discovery, everything is cool, even something as simple as water from a faucet,
Yes.
and just the imagination that it takes to drive your car through the succulents and imagine that you're maybe like on a safari through the jungle, or something like that. It's just bringing that childlike joy back into things, and like choosing that as something to renew the mind, to see the world in a new way, to challenge yourself to kind of brush off what we have been so used, the patterns we've been so used to thinking in.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. The question that I ask every guest, and that is sometimes the hardest question of the whole podcast. Not that hopefully my questions aren't particularly hard to begin with, but it's just because we all love reading and we all love books. I always ask for 2 to 3 book recommendations to kind of end out the podcast with and recommend them to our listeners. So it can be hard to narrow it down to 2 or 3, but what would yours be?
Okay. It's a little bit of a cheat because I mentioned it earlier, but definitely Dante's Divine Comedy.
Yeah.
I all of it, not just Inferno. A lot of people don't like Purgatorio or Paradiso, the very last one. I actually wrote an essay on Paradiso and Botticelli's drawings of it for graduate school, and I came to have a newfound appreciation for it. So I recommend read all three. They are fantastic. Paradiso is a little bit more abstract, I think, but it's very interesting, especially if you're interested in the kind of topics that we've been talking about, like theology, philosophy. Um, so I'll count that as one though, even though it's technically 3 parts. Um, Ooh, for another one, I do have to say The Count of Monte Cristo. I read that back in high
Mm.
school, and I it's a classic. I've been seeing a lot of people talking about it online lately, which has interested me because I didn't know that it was. I mean, obviously I knew that it was popular. It's a classic, but I've been fascinated to see people talking about it more recently.
It
Anyway,
has gotten a
it's
bit of
one
a
of my absolute
resurgence.
favorite books. Yeah, yeah, I think so. But read the unabridged version because it's
Ah,
honestly worth it to get all of the different plot lines in there, I think. Yeah. And actually I will add also the another book that probably most people or a lot of people have read, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I recently finished
oh,
that and I am definitely all in on the Stormlight Archives. It was so
yeah.
fantastic. I loved it.
Okay. So I have read, I actually, um, kind of a behind the scenes peek. The laptop that I have this running on that I'm recording myself and this with, is stacked on top of the Mistborn trilogy, like so that I have
Yes.
like a nice height. So like I love Brandon Sanderson, but I have not gotten around to the Stormlight Archives part of it yet. I've read the Mistborn, I've read the Wax and Wayne trilogy, and like I definitely,
Oh,
or
okay.
no, I think there's 4 books to that. But I have this terrible thing. I don't know what happened. I think I burnt myself out on reading too many series. Like, and I just like, if it has more than like 2 or 3 books, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know if I have the energy to commit to them.
Yeah.
But I know that it's Brandon Sanderson. I know I'm probably going to enjoy it. I've heard many good things about Stormlight Archives.
Yeah, same. It was recommended to me to start with the Mistborn trilogy, so I did that. And it was a good kind of dipping your toes in the water of his world building and how he writes.
Yes.
But yeah,
Mhm.
the Stormlight Archive was fantastic.
Would you say that, okay, not to put you on the spot, would you say that you enjoyed that more than the Mistborn trilogy?
Ooh, okay, it's hard to say because I've only read the first book so far of the Stormlight Archive, so
That's
I
fair.
can't make a very balanced assessment, but I do think based on book one, I don't know if I like it more or not, but it's close. It's very close, I think.
That's fair. Okay.
Yeah.
The Mistborn trilogy. I think I told you previously, I have what I call my legacy bookshelf. And I think it'll be on previous episodes, but just to give the explanation, these are books that I have read throughout my life that impacted me very deeply in some way, shape, or form. And so
Mm,
they're books that I want to pass on to my children. And so I have them like reserved on a special bookshelf in my room here. And so the Mistborn trilogy is a series on my legacy bookshelf.
yes.
It was, like, instrumental in, I'd say I mean, I read it maybe, like, a handful of years ago, and I've always been interested in reading and writing, obviously, but after reading that, I kind of felt for the first time, like, how impactful a fantasy setting can be to my own developing sense of religion, if that makes sense. Because of just,
Yeah.
like, all of the stuff that he packs into that, and I was just like, you can still write a gripping fantasy story, right? And, like, touch on these things that felt very academic to me beforehand, and so then relating that back to that's, like, literally, like, what you're doing, like, with this book, and so it's, like, really cool to see that come out in, like, your interests and the story and the way that you're writing it.
Yes, awesome. Yeah. I also love that idea about the legacy bookshelf. I need to do that too.
Yeah, it's fun, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So then your book will be on there, your series will be on there, right? And it'll be right next to the
Oh,
Stormlight Archive, Mistborn trilogy.
I feel so honored.
Yeah, it'll be up there. Perfect. Awesome. Okay. Well, that's it for me. Where can people find you?
I'm mainly active on Instagram under at a Wendt writing. So you can find me there. I technically have TikTok, but I'm not super active on it. And Substack, of course, under Till We Find Joy.
Perfect. Alrighty. Well, Alexandra, as usual, it's been a pleasure. I'm really excited to see how your serialization of this first book goes on Substack and all of the great discussion that's going to come out of it. And I'll be looking forward to the next one as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.